Before I start this video, I want to talk about a couple of assumptions. I've removed both fenders, but the video I'll cover will deal with the driver's side, but they're just mirror images of each other, so it doesn't really matter. But I want to talk about a couple assumptions first. So this video starts with the assumption that you've already removed the hood, you've already removed the inner fenders, right? And you're dealing with just the outer fender. You want to remove the outer fenders. It also, the assumption is that you have the grill out, which isn't required. I removed mine because I'm going to replace it. And if you're not going to remove the front grill, that's fine. Because at the end of the video, I'll go over, there's really two ways to take out, there's 3 bolts over here. We're going to get more into that in the video, but if you have the grill removed, you can use a long extension and a socket. If you don't have the grill removed, it's a little bit more of a pain. You got to use a wrench. A ratchet wrench works, of course, much better, but even that's still a pain. Yeah, you can do it though. It's no big deal. But if the grill is removed, it's really quick to get those out. So again, inner fenders gone. Hood removed, and in my case, I have the grill removed. The particular year I'm working with here is 85, and I'm not sure what the range is. I think it's something like 81 to 91, but don't quote me on that. You'll have to do that research on your own, but this is definitely an 85, and I'm going to show you how to remove this outer fender. There's a couple videos out there online already on this, and a couple of them are missing. They're missing telling you where a couple screws are. So I thought I'd do one myself. So I'm going to do this maybe what some folks would think is a little backwards, but when you get ready to grab this fender, put your gloves on and pull this fender off, this is what you need to have removed. If you have not removed these number of screws, it's still got hardware in there. So there's only 2 sizes. There's 10 screws total in 2 sizes. One is a 1/2 inch socket or wrench. The other is a 9/16 socket or wrench. But yeah, there's 10. There's 7 of the smaller ones that have the 1/2 inch head machine screws. And then there's 3 larger machine screws that have the 9/16 head. And I'm going to show you where each one of those screws is. We'll do the location of the 3 big ones with the 9/16 head on them. The first one is underneath. It's kind of, if you just picture if you were driving the rig, it'd be just forward of where your left foot would be. So that's the first one, just to give you some idea of where we are. I'm going to kind of move up a little bit here, and you can kind of see, you know, that's where we're at. Okay, that's the first one. Your second big screw with the 9/16 head is inside the door jamb. So you have to open the door to get to it, and that's where it is. So here's where we're at. Okay, once again, it's right there. This last one is up here by the hinge to the hood, just to kind of give you an idea of where we're at. Okay, here's the window. We follow it down, we come in, and it's right there. And you can see in this one I have a shim in there. These shims are body shims that they put in at the factory to get everything level. Sometimes you won't have a shim. If the fender just happened to line up perfectly, they wouldn't put a shim in, but most of the time you will see a shim. And of course they're tapered, so depending on how they position these shims, whether you put the same fender on, you'll need to put the shim back in the same position. If you're putting a new fender on, you may need a different shim or not need a shim at all. You might need 2 shims. So anyway, that's the third one. So we've covered the 3 big screws. Now we're up inside the hood, right up here by the headlight, and there's 4 of these, and these are the, of course, now we're into the ones with the 1/2 inch head. Again, there's 7 of those, And there's 4 of them that run right down here in a line. There's one, there's another hole there, 2, 3, and then there's one down there, 4. They're all in a line except for the last one is offset a little bit, but I mean, you can't miss it. I'll center the right where it's at. There, that's about centered. You can kind of see the hole there. So that's where those 4 go. So your last 3 are the hardest to get to, and they're adjacent to the headlights. There's 2 that are stacked on top of each other by the bottom headlight. You can see the holes where they're stacked. And there you can see the last one, the hole there. Now let me just tell you, if your grill is out, these are really easy to get out just with a long extension. There's plenty of room for a long extension and a ratchet. In fact, I used an air ratchet. They came right out, no issues. If your grill is still in, yeah, you're probably going to have to use a wrench. You'll have to use a wrench to get those. But again, if the grill's out, you can use a long extension and a 1/2-inch socket, and that works out just fine. One last thing I wanted to mention, because in some of the videos, there's some guys saying you have to remove those speed nuts behind the trim. Just so you know, that's not accurate. That's not true. That trim that's on that fender rides on these rails, and it's separated. So when you take the fender off, the trim's going to come off with it. And if you want to keep the trim, obviously, I'm sure a lot of guys want to do that. If you want to keep the trim, trust me, it's a lot easier to take those speed nuts off after you've removed the fender. You know, you can lay it down on a couple sawhorses or whatever than to try and reach up under there and try and do it while it's still bolted on. So don't worry about removing those speed nuts. That little piece of trim will come off with the fender. One other thing to say about these old square bodies, and this goes without saying, even though I'm in Arizona, this pickup my dad bought new in '85, and it spent its life in Kansas, and they do salt the roads there, so it does have some corrosion issues. But wherever you may be, you may have different levels of corrosion on your square body. And one thing I wanted to tell you is, this is just my advice, take it or leave it, but resist the urge to put the impact on these machine screws and nuts, because you'll see a lot of guys do videos and they break them off, because some of them are really, really hard to get out. The method that I use is I hit them with some PB Blaster, and then I'll try it. If they don't budge, I'll heat it up with a torch. And if I can just get it barely to maybe make a quarter of a turn, then I'll hit it with the PB Blaster and I'll screw it back in, which, seems counterintuitive, and you're trying to remove it. You don't want to be screwing it back in, but that's what I do. And I keep working it that way, and I'll get it out a little bit further. I'll hit it with PB Blaster and I'll run it back in, and then pretty soon they just come right out, especially if you're using air tools. But I'll use an air ratchet or whatever, but I would avoid using any kind of impact devices on these old rusted screws, because the odds are you may just break them off, and then you got to drill it out and retap it. You know what a pain that is. So yeah, don't do that. So there you have it. The fender, they're not heavy at all. You could just grab them. I'd wear some gloves though, because especially if they're corroded or rusty, you could end up with a jagged edge or something and get a nasty cut. So yeah, throw a pair of gloves on. But yeah, just kind of pick it up. Don't be surprised if you hear some things clanking, falling on the ground. That's just those shims. There may be shims in a couple other locations too. Don't worry about that, because odds are you're going to have to put them back in a different position than they were anyway. So don't freak out about that. One thing I might mention I do, I either bag and tag everything, I just use sandwich bags, Ziploc bags, because I can't remember, you know, what screw went where, so that's what I do. Or if you go to Harbor Freight, you can get these little bins like this. If you're not using, like some of them I don't use. I have maybe 5 or 6 that aren't labeled, so I'll grab those and I'll just throw my machine screws or whatever in there, and that's a good system too. So anyway, just a little suggestion there. All right, have a good one.